it's quite possible for the mind to become still and quiet. Even though so much of the time we don't experience it that way. Given the right setting, the right tendencies, the mind can become still and quiet. Not through effort. Effortlessly. There's no need to think ourselves into existence. Dropping into the body is a way of describing a shift from the creating an experience in our head into feeling an experience that exists. When we're in our head, we might think that we know, are being informed of what is, because there are lots of answers and lots of interpretations of life or answers to questions. How are you? Oh, I'm very good, thank you. We might not even realize that the answer is coming from our head based on our idea of what the right answer is, an idea of how we feel, an assumption about how we are. It can be quite a surprise for us to find ourselves doing it differently, dropping into the body and really feeling what the answer is before knowing or responding. To know the answer, to feel the answer, requires attention to drop out of the head. And to be with what is. In a curious way. Like, I wonder how I feel. I wonder what's there, let me see. And it doesn't require us to create the answer. It requires us to know the answer, to feel the answer. We might not realize that for our whole life we had an answer of what was on the table based on something other than looking in the present moment to see what is on the table. So we get asked, what's on the table? And we answer it from our head based on what we've been told is on the table, what we saw on the table last week, what we think's on the table, what we think should be on the table. We might not realize that we have an answer that isn't based on actually seeing what's on the table and then having that be our answer. So this is an encouragement to drop into the body, which is where the experience of life can be known much more directly. At this stage, I'm not even talking about knowing any particular component of life, not talking about knowing the fundamental nature of life or anything like that, just the very rudimentary aspects, a bodily sensation. How do you feel inside right now? And the answer given by words is simply a representation of the actual felt answer. Oh, I feel anxious, or I feel unsettled, or I feel relaxed, or I feel curious. I feel tingling in my foot. You see, the false sense of self, the fragile and vulnerable sense of self that has formed as part of the movement of life, not formed because we made it happen, but rather it formed as a natural progression after being born, or more accurately, I guess, after being conceived. It just happens very gradually. A large part of it is dependent on concepts about the body, concepts created by thinking and thought. So a lot of it happens after we start to understand language, not necessarily after we start speaking, but we probably understand a lot before we start speaking. And so the false sense of self that gets formed is one based primarily on thought about what has happened, even at a very young age. And what I mean by what has happened is the experience of who we are. That is what has happened. And so that arising, that experience arising, then forces an idea about who we are to set in place based on how the experience is felt. So we get taken essentially out of pure experiencing into a conceptualized sense of self that starts to form at a fairly young age. And that is the birth of the false sense of self that is essentially very fragile and vulnerable. Because it's a thought. I am this and I need that, and I can be attacked by this and that. If I don't have this, then things aren't quite right. In the absence of that sense of self, the flow of life happens, and it doesn't hit anyone except for the physical body, and it creates a physical experience. But then there's no psychological arising of what this means about me. But when the psychological self develops, then all the things that take place are judged. And in that process of judging the validity, the acceptability of life, there's an uncomfortableness of self. And it might not be apparent, but that is the lens, the filter through which life is being experienced. Another way may never have been known, and so it's assumed that, well, this is the only way to know life. I am knowing life the only way that is available, without even knowing what actually is happening in that way, without knowing the nuance of what is taking place. A conceptual sense of self has formed and is experiencing life according to what it thinks life means about what it is. And a way out of that sense of self, not a way out that we can make happen, but a way out that can happen, is through feeling, through dropping into the body and just being curious about what is here. Not even someone being curious, but a receptivity a curious receptivity, not of someone, a curious receptivity to know what is, to feel what is. A different attitude, one that says, oh, I'm here not to want the experience to be a certain way, but rather to be a witness to the experience. A bit like being given an assignment in a house that might be, let's say, in this analogy, haunted by ghosts. And you are told that your mission is to peek into the room, the various rooms of the house, and if the ghosts are seen, to just be aware of them. To be very quiet and on the edge, otherwise they will vanish, and just observe their movements in the room. Become familiar with what is there. Your job is not to change it, not to judge whether what is there is valid or invalid. It's just to be an observer. An interested observer. Interested in detail, if possible, but without the requirement for detail to obscure a soft allowance of everything that is. Meaning, no need to search at all costs for detail, because that might mean there isn't a soft witnessing. So if a soft witnessing sets in, it might become apparent that there isn't someone doing the witnessing. Because we don't really need to think about what is being felt, what is being heard, what is being seen, smelt, tasted, touched. That doesn't require someone. It doesn't require thinking. All of that can be known prior to any thinking happening. And it isn't about knowing just the visual field, or the sound field, or the smell field. This can be done with what we call eyes closed in an instant. There is still an experience. A whole set of layers of experience continue to be there, even if sight falls away or visual components fall away. Maybe the idea of an inside and outside drops away, and attention just comes to the new experience. Sees that memories of a world of form are carried into this moment from outside, from the past. If attention lands on the experience as it is right now, we might realize there is no world of form anymore. And yet awareness is there of whatever is in this present moment. awareness of thoughts, awareness of emotions, of feelings, awareness of the changeability of the moment. Thoughts may go from intense to more in the background. The content of the thought might change. There might be some judgment about noises or about the state of the meditation. There might be awareness of the judgment. There may be awareness of the vast open space that has no particular form, no edges, no corners, no distance. You might ask yourself, is this vast spaciousness that we might think is inside our head or the back of the eyelids, until we realize that there is no head, there are no eyelids except as a thought that says there is a body sitting in a chair with eyes closed. As that falls away, we might realize there is just this vast open space. Is it white or black? Is it lots of white spots on a black background? Or is it black static on a white background, white static on a black background? Is it any of that? And who am I? What is aware? Where does it come from? Are these questions even important? Or can we just feel the undeniable sense of amness, isness? And be that. This awareness of what is meditation also happens more deeply when there is a dropping out of the head. No job to do, no one to do it. A softness, a melting into the awareness that is. All of the suffering in life is a movement of the false sense of self. It's very in line with the false sense of self. Nothing at all going wrong. It's what the psychological or the conceptual sense of who I am does. It has to. It's its nature. To be in conflict, to be in resistance, to be judgment, to be uncomfortable in life. The nature of the false sense of self is uncomfortableness. And at best, in times of pleasure, the uncomfortableness can sometimes be covered up until the pleasure fades away. And then we find what's left is the false sense of self that feels uncomfortable with the fact that the pleasure that for a while delivered some sort of relief, an uncomfortableness with the fact that pleasure has ended, or an uncomfortableness about regret, an uncomfortableness about what might happen in the future, an uncomfortableness of just being itself, which is a constant movement of thinking about the past or the future, complaining about the present. So suffering is the nature of the false sense of self, which is great news, because it means when the false sense of self starts to be seen as a movement of thought, when another movement into the heart becomes more established, the suffering starts to fade away and is seen to be not the true nature of what we are deep at our core. This is why liberation is spoken about in history and in the present. It's available because there is a self that is deeper and more stable, less fragile, less vulnerable than the psychological or conceptual sense of self that forms quite naturally as part of the process of life. And teachings are gently reminding us, gently encouraging a movement, gently trying to bring about or be part of that impersonal change. So the individual doesn't have to put a lot of effort into making the change, but rather allow the words to come in and out, allow natural interest in inquiry to happen, watch videos when it feels like that's what the time is right for, without needing to control the experience, knowing that the new conditioning delivered by life is enough, and that's how the change happens. So we might hear that there is a place outside of thinking, that the body is a doorway to that deeper silence, the body where we can feel, experience, where we can actually know the experience of life much more directly without it being an interpretation from the mind. That's the doorway. So that new information is thrown out and might land somewhere, not to make some massive change necessarily in this present moment, but it may come up and inspire a thought sometime tomorrow when you might find that driving is happening or washing the dishes is taking place. And the thought, oh, my deeper self is outside of the conceptual sense of self, which might lead to a moment of thought being cut off because attention falls into the body and there's a curiosity to see what's here, to feel, to be what's here. We're not separate from what's here. The awareness that is aware of what's here is not aware of it from outside. If awareness was outside of the various thoughts, sensations, feelings, they would not be what's here now. The very fact that something is here now means it is at one with the awareness that is aware of it. And we know awareness is aware of something when it is known to be what is here now. A bird chirping is here now because it arises within the awareness that is aware of it. Should it be outside of awareness, it wouldn't exist as an object in the present moment. If the bird or the chirping sound were outside of awareness, separate from awareness, there wouldn't be a sound of that in the present moment. For there to be that sound in the present moment, it means it is one with awareness, not separate from awareness, arising inside awareness. A thought that has the power to separate, power to make us think that the sound is outside awareness, is heard from outside. That thought can be there. And it can be very powerful. But it can actually never separate the sound or the sight objects or the sense of self from being inside and not separate from awareness. Let us not believe our thoughts as representation of truth. They are just the meager ramblings of an intellect that knows life from a very, very limited perspective. And as those ramblings are less believed, less seen as an interpretation of what is, then something else reveals itself. The ramblings, when seen to be ramblings, are like a curtain being drawn open. And when the ramblings are seen to be a reflection of truth, it is like a curtain being drawn closed, preventing a seeing beyond what the belief says. Everything arises in consciousness, is made of consciousness, and is witnessed by consciousness. This isn't something to think about, but it's something that can be known right now in the present moment, in the stilling of the thinking mind. And the doorway to that is presence, and the doorway to presence is the body and feeling. And then maybe realizing that the feeling is not happening in the body or by the body. So first attention can come into the body as if it is the body feeling. That is the doorway. And at some point the experience might morph such that it is more evident that it is always awareness that is not the body, that is aware. That the body is just another object that the awareness that is always aware is aware of. The body is an object, not separate from awareness because it is known. It is arising inside awareness. But it is not the subject. It's an object. And truly the subject and object are not two. All there is consciousness. From this perspective of the silent witness, life as a happening, life as an unfolding, life as a play of consciousness is not a concept anymore. It's what is revealed. It is possible for the mind to slow down. For it to become irrelevant in the knowing of what is here now. If the mind slows down enough, then just sitting there is as effortless as sleeping. It is, in a sense, an awake sleep, a deep rest, a deep being. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. The bodily sensations, even pain, can fade away deep into the background, which really implies diving deep, where consciousness rolls into itself, moving deeper and deeper away from the world of form into the formless, where time stands still, where desires dissolve. And all that is left is the undeniable sense of amness, isness. Awareness aware of itself. Awareness aware of its aspect, its facet of awareness. And that awareness aware of the other facet of being, existence. Not even knowing what exists. The existence has no age, it has no gender, it has no preferences. What exists is not informed, but the fact that there is existence, that there is presence, amness, I am. And when that's known and experienced, we realize that the I is not referring to all of the personal preferences and thinking and ideas. It's not referring to the body, but it's referring to the very impersonal sense of existence that is the core of consciousness. A core of existence that, for the most part, we have only ever known enshrouded by the body, and therefore it is assumed that the sense of existence is because and of the body. However, if you've ever had dreams at night, when in some dreams the protagonist, the main character in the dream, isn't a reflection of the body that we know in the waking state. So you might maybe in some dreams have the sense that you are older or younger, maybe even a different gender to what you normally know yourself as in the waking state, or essentially a different person as the main character. And yet, when you wake up and you tell someone, I had the most peculiar dream last night. I was, let's say, a woman in the dream with blonde hair. Let's say, this is Roger speaking. I had the most peculiar dream last night. In the dream, I was a woman with blonde hair, but somehow I knew it was me. That was who I was, that woman in the dream. And maybe we haven't given thought to the fact that what inhabited the dream character was that same impersonal sense of I, the I that doesn't have an age or a gender or preferences. An I that we have mainly known as the core of a particular body, the body that we have in the waking state, with its particular age and gender and preferences. And so we've assumed that that impersonal I, which is not seen to be an impersonal I, is a very personal I. In the dream, the clothing is changed completely. The body is replaced with a completely different body, and yet we might find it peculiar. We go, well, it's strange, I was someone totally different, and yet I knew that was who I was. And with this explanation, we might understand why. Because what I've always been familiar with as the sense of existence is the impersonal I, that is the same impersonal I that inhabits all of us, inhabits all of the bodies, and in fact inhabits any bodies that might be created in what we call a night dream. So the experience of I that we've always had, that has always arisen in a certain context or shell, being the shell of the body, is assumed to be of the body. But there are little hints to tell us it's not of the body. And meditation, when essentially the body and the thoughts and the preferences, the thoughts about how old I am, what gender I am. When all of that falls away, we're left knowing, being that impersonal I am. And in that, there is the undeniable sense that there is existence. That is the core of consciousness. And as we find a movement that grounds into that, appreciates that, then the forgetting who we are, which is synonymous with thinking that what I am is the body, thinking that what I am is the body that is affected by the flow of life, by the circumstance. Well, the body is affected by the circumstance, but thinking that I am the body that is affected by the circumstance makes us very fragile. Because a psychological resistance to circumstance then has to happen. Because circumstance is seen to be an attack on who I believe myself to be, which is a forgetting of what I really am at my core. At my core, what I am, what everyone is the formless, invulnerable, unchanging, unaffected by the flow of life consciousness. And there's freedom in knowing that deeply, which means experiencing, falling back into that more and more regularly until it becomes first nature. From that place, death becomes a very different prospect. The idea of death becomes something very different to the idea of death when we know ourselves as the body. The formless sense of I am is interested only in its own existence now. Not interested in its own existence carrying on, but rather it knows that it exists now. It's the psychological sense of self that says, oh, but what if I don't exist tomorrow? Consciousness doesn't think. Consciousness can be aware of thoughts that arise, but consciousness doesn't think. The intellect is thought. Consciousness can't think. Consciousness can be. Thinking can happen, but thinking is a movement of thought arising inside the consciousness that is. Consciousness can't think. Consciousness can't talk. Speaking is just the arising of words within consciousness. Consciousness doesn't speak. Consciousness can't be emotional. Emotions arise as objects of emotion. They arise within consciousness. Consciousness can only be. For a long time we think consciousness can think, but it will only think wise things. We think acceptance or thoughts of acceptance are the thoughts of consciousness, and ignorance or non-acceptance are the thoughts of the ego. Consciousness can't think. Both wise thoughts and ignorant thoughts are thoughts arising in consciousness, made of consciousness and witnessed by consciousness. But consciousness doesn't think. Consciousness is. So we could just end it there, but I will give an opportunity for anyone who has any questions. Maybe that doesn't exist. If the mind is silent and quiet, then questions most likely have fallen away. Hello, Ranko.
Hello, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
That is all. I want to thank you about satsangs. They are great. They help me a lot. So I'm very, very grateful for your work.
Thank you for saying that.
I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Ranko. Hi, Terence.
Hello. Hi, Roger. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I had a question about, you were talking about dropping into the body.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess for some people, when you drop into the body, a lot of sensations are not like increased heart rate, a lot of physiological sensations seem to arise. And is this just something that for people who aren't used to dropping in the body, this is a new experience and it has to, these sensations have to need some time to stabilize or to play themselves out, so to speak. Sometimes these sensations can be very strong. Is that quite typical for people?
Typical in the sense that I think a lot of people report that, but it doesn't mean everyone is going to experience that. So there will be commonalities, let's say, in different groups of people as the body structure changes. And so you mentioned physiological effects, like an increased heart rate, for example. Other people will notice an uncomfortableness in the body, not just a physiological uncomfortableness, but a sort of psychological sense of, no, I am going to die here. I'm at threat here. I'm uncomfortable in the body, which is why, as a result of that uncomfortableness, there often has been a retreating to somewhere outside of the body. The head is a place that can produce some sort of refuge if the body structure includes in it a lot of loads, of psychological loads, which we might think, oh, the psychological loads are in the head. And a freedom from the psychological loads is to drop into the body. However, what some people will find is that in the body, the psychological loads are even stronger. And so it seems like a win to not be in the body, so a transcendence or a bypassing of the body. So if that's the case, I still would say that the body is the doorway, and a familiarity with those feelings in time will bring about a change as to how those feelings are known and experienced, and maybe even a change to those experiences themselves. So I think dropping into the body can feel physiologically uncomfortable, psychologically uncomfortable, and if we can remember that those feelings aren't ever going to kill you in and of themselves. They might tell us that it's very unsafe in this place. The feelings might say that staying here is going to kill you, is going to be your demise. But in fact, the feelings, when they are faced, do not have the capacity to do any damage in and of themselves. So that information may be a motivation to push the boundary of behavior, recognizing that in the past, the uncomfortable feeling that says this is going to kill me is actually just a feeling, and that let's see if I stay there for a second longer, or 2 seconds longer, or maybe even a minute longer in the fear, what happens to who I am in the face of that fear. And there's always going to be a limit of how much exposure to uncomfortableness is going to be tolerated, and at some point it being a certain intensity is going to lead to a moving away from it. But gradually, as the boundaries are pushed, then we might find that things change. So if we've always done if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we always got, is one of the catch cries of Alcoholics Anonymous, I think. And so this is an invitation to see if something different happens. So yes, the physiological feelings and more uncomfortably is the psychological sense of uncomfortableness. They will be there, maybe for the first time, because if we're not in the body, we might not have experienced those. And I suggest allowing them to be, and maybe realizing the consciousness that is aware of them is actually untouched by those feelings or those sensations.
I see. And if dropping into the body also results in like a lot of trembling, muscle twitches, spasms, convulsion type activities, are those? I kind of want to ask you, what do I do with those? but so would do you just remain present or try to witness those sensations while I guess I'm wondering what would motivate continuing to drop into the body. So I guess you're talking about this is updating my conditioning to maybe stay with the investigate the twitching longer, so that and perhaps what may happen is that twitching is that the body updating its own learning. Perhaps, I guess, because if you'll notice patterns of breath getting faster, nervous system getting aroused, and then quieting again. And if that happens without thought, it seems like those cycles will just keep the body's learning on its own, somehow, that these cycles, it's agitating itself and then calming down, and eventually will it learn to, that will become kind of a flat thing. Eventually, as
well, who
its
knows?
own learning.
Who knows what the eventual will be? But we do see patterns where, when certain energies get activated in the body, we could look at the body like a system of pipes, water pipes. And if you've ever turned your water off and changed a tap or fixed a leak in the pipe, and then turn the water back on, you get all this spluttering out of some taps until the water fills up the pipes and gets rid of all the air bubbles. And maybe if you've been changing the pipe out in the dirt, mud gets into the pipe and you get brown water coming out of the taps for a bit. And when certain parts of the process happen, when certain beliefs fall away, that's all of those things that make up the pipe work, and the blockages in the pipe work and the water and all of that. So all of these changes do lead to movement in the pipe that wasn't there before, in a way, like bits of scale in the pipe collapsing into the water and flushing through, blockages in certain areas opening up, which then changes pressures in different parts of the pipe work. And so a lot of these things you're talking about, twitching, involuntary movements, maybe even movements known as that we see in sacred dance, hand fingers coming together, creating energetic channels. All of this can happen unconsciously through the intelligence of the body. And so if we can find a position where all of these movements are seen to be natural, explainable happenings according to the changing structure, then that information might allow those things to happen, knowing that they are a representation of change, most probably change for the best, because it is part of the restructuring. And then maybe a less involvement in it can happen. Yet still, some of those energetic shifts and movements can be extremely uncomfortable. Uncomfortable to the point that I don't suggest someone needs to go too far with pushing their boundaries, because the thought can be, I have to sit with this, where the intention to sit with it becomes a doing because the force of the uncomfortableness is so strong, and then the only reason we don't move away is because we say, I have to sit here. I should endure all of this. And so I'm suggesting that no, if that happens, then what I'm suggesting has gone too far in the other direction, where instead of us continually moving away, we're now forcing ourselves to unnaturally stick with it. So I would say, allow curiosity to see, to push the boundaries, knowing that at any moment when it feels too uncomfortable, we can allow the habit to get up and distract and all of that to happen, knowing that we can sit with it again in 5 minutes or in 5 days or in 5 years whenever it feels appropriate.
I see. Okay, thanks. That helps. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Terence.
Thank you.
Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Roger. You hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
So happy birthday first.
Thank you. Very sweet.
We had a little bird telling us.
Yeah, it's out now.
First of all, I want to thank you for all your beautiful videos and talks. They really are a big help.
I'm glad to hear that.
I especially love that you're really practical guy. Because a lot of things that you find in the Advaita non-duality scene is the truth, probably, talking about the truth, pointing to the truth, but it's I feel that there's a state where you need something that you can grab, kind of, and with things that are not very practical, it's more or less only frustrating, because you feel that there is something that they want to tell you, but you, like the mind is going berserk. And I think, I feel like that the practical approach is something that gives the mind something to chew on, but at the same time something deeper resonates with it and makes it possible to drop deeper. So.
Yeah, it can very easily, what happens when we are looking at it from the top-down point of view, which, today's satsang was very much, you could say, not practical. Ironically, but I know that most of the content is practical. And so the fact that something is practical or not practical doesn't make it good when it's practical and bad if it's not. They're just different. But I appreciate what you're saying is the practical side can overcome some problems. Well, the impractical overcomes problems of just keeping it practical, and the practical overcomes some problems of just keeping it esoteric. And so sometimes if we're coming from the top down, the esoteric, the less practical, we think it's all about becoming formless presence and only about that, knowing truth. And practical daily living and the consequences in practical daily living seem inconsequential. Whereas I think, thankfully, Ramesh came along and said, hey, let's keep this practical. What are we really looking for? And his suggestion was, we're looking for peace of mind in daily living. We have to continue to live as the person until the body dies. So seeking ultimately needs to be about our attitude to the flow of life, the attitude of the person, at which the core of which is consciousness. So yes, this keeping it practical to me is very important, because it's so easy to get lost in what it's not all about, or what it's not really about, and make it all about consciousness or awareness, whereas that to me is an awakening to an aspect of ourself that then delivers peace of mind. And if that's not clear, we will awaken to ourselves and think that's what it's about. So now I need to awaken more deeply, go into the nothing even more. And I think we can keep heading into the nothing and thinking that that is going to deliver what we're really looking for, instead of coming back out into daily living and recognizing when our attitude becomes an attitude of duality, becomes an attitude of attachment, becomes an attitude of doership, becomes an attitude that creates uncomfortableness. And then we get to work on it from both angles.
Yeah, and especially like in my case, like I'm on the path since, I guess, like over 20 years now, and there's a big difference between the Sonia in the beginning that was, like single, had a lot of time and could delve, like into something like for weeks without anyone disturbing. Now I'm a single mom with 3 boys, and I really need a practical approach, because I don't have time to, or let's say that's an idea, but in practical daily life, it's great to see that even in the midst of all the chaos, a thought drops like deeper or pops up, like from a satsang that I heard last night, let's say, and I remember, okay, are you feeling awkward now because you are in the stewardship thing? Or, there was this one advice that you gave about if you feel like you're in the thinking mind, just say stop, there, like in the midst of the thought. And this happened many times now. And it's good to see that this is really hands-on,
Yeah, this is great. I'm very grateful to Ramesh, who I think has pioneered keeping it practical, and I'm glad to be able to carry that on. So thanks for your comments.
Thank you.
Hello, Akshay.
Hey, Roger.
Hi.
I just learned it's your birthday today, so happy birthday.
Thank you.
And then what I wanted to ask was, in the meditation that you did earlier, as the body as the doorway, I often notice that as I rest in presence more, or as that gets deeper, the breath tends to slow down, and often there's like a deep resting on the exhale for like a long time. And so, at one level, the body doesn't exist, it's all awareness. And at the other level, the body is the doorway, and there's like, I guess, physiological effects and also mental effects, like the way you think changes the deeper you are in source, I suppose. So could you say anything about the body being a doorway and the localization of consciousness?
Yeah. The key is, so if I say the body is the doorway, we might actually take that and say, oh, I have to remain in the body because that's the doorway. But remember, the doorway is useful for us to move through the doorway. So if we hear the notion that the body is the doorway and then say, oh, so I need to stay in the body because that's the doorway, what that might equate to is finding a doorway and standing in the doorway, like in the frame of the door, and remaining there. But the doorway is the bridge, the portal, the door. Let's keep it simple. The door to what is beyond the doorway. So what you were speaking about is something like the breath slowing down. At some point, if we let go of the doorway, so we've come into the body, the door and doorway gets left behind, which in practice means it too dissolves and stops being part of the experience. So in the meditation, if we keep focusing on the body as the doorway, in a way, what happens is we keep the doorway alive, which means we keep standing in the doorway. In practice, what happens, so the meditation becomes about being in the doorway. When that tends to, when the doorway starts to dissolve, then we've gone through the doorway. And that, in practice, in the meditation, is essentially the falling away of the body and the breathing and the thinking and even the external sounds. So we might say, well, how do we get rid of the external sounds? Are there any such things as external? Let's look at it as we normally know life. We say, well, if there's sounds of cars or dogs barking, birds chirping, how do we get rid of that? How do we get rid of the sensation of the body? And you can't, but it can happen as the meditation deepens, which is actually moving through the doorway. So coming into the body is a phase, you can say. So bringing attention into the body, being aware of the breathing, is walking into the doorway, and then even that can fall away. But it's not going to fall away if we keep, let's say, if a thought keeps coming up, remain in the body, because that thought that arises in that moment, remain in the body, is in a way recreating the doorway and keeping us in the doorway. So even those ideas can fall away, and we might experience the sensation, sound, falls away in practice, in the experience of it. Now, whether the sounds are happening somewhere or not is not so much the question. We might find that we have an experience where, after a period of time, who knows what time has actually elapsed, whether time actually exists, because we're in a place where essentially time has stopped when we've gone through the doorway. Who really knows what was there? But from our experience, we might say, wow, senses fell away. The body fell away, which means the experience of the body fell away. So if something like breathing slowing down happens, we could keep saying, oh, my breathing is slowing down, or we can even go past the idea that breathing is slowing down, and maybe attention even comes away from the breathing and goes beyond the breathing. Now, if we find ourselves going back into the head, then we can come back to the body as the doorway. Right? And so all I'm pointing at here is, let's not get stuck in the doorway.
Yeah, thank you. Makes sense.
Good one. Thank you, Akshay. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes, and I can see you too.
Good. I wanted to touch a little bit. Maybe you could touch on the subject of the past. Did it really happen? Well, first of all, I just want to start this by saying I'm finding more and more that in my consciousness, I think, is it you that proposed the two terms of the working mind and the thinking mind?
No, that was Ramesh's teaching, and in fact,
Okay.
I've seen it prior to Ramesh. J. Krishnamurti had used it.
Okay. Because I was deeply immersed in Krishnamurti for several decades.
Mm-hmm.
But I just bring it up because I find that my thinking mind, which gets all wrapped up in all political and the drama of life,
Mm-hmm.
will just all of a sudden something will just cut it off. I don't know if it's, I love that you just said consciousness can't think or doesn't think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if consciousness can do something like reach out and just put the brakes on the thinking mind and just allow the working mind to come to fruition. But I find that when I'm just being and I'm not thinking,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder about the past. For instance, I met you, 5 years ago? I sat 4 feet in front of you.
In Bethlehem.
And I wonder, did that Bethlehem?
Yeah.
Did that really happen? I mean, I was going through a box of old photos. I'm looking at all these. I go, did these people ever really exist in my life? Are they just they only exist as a box in my mind when I look at a picture? Do you understand? That's very, very abstract, but
No, I completely understand.
I don't know.
And that's the paradox, is that we have to acknowledge that really I don't know whether there was a yesterday at all. This could be a dream that spontaneously arose right now for whoever is experiencing life, and we go, maybe I'm in a dream that didn't exist a second ago, and it exists now, and all of the content of what exists now in the dream that spontaneously arose in a consciousness, the content of the dream that exists now includes an object that when we look at it, we say, oh, memory is an object in the present moment, an object that says you were born 48 years ago to the day, in my case, and you did this yesterday and did that yesterday, and we don't often relate to it as anything but the truth. We normally relate to memories as the truth that I remember happening. Whereas if we look at it more honestly in the present moment, we say, well, it may be that we have memories because of something that happened, or it might be that a memory is an object inserted to create the impression that something happened. And the truth is, we say, we don't know, but it's good of us, or it's good if a movement that recognizes the possibility of either being there, because the truth is we start off assuming it to be only one way, which is memory is a result of the fact something did happen. That's how it presents, how it appears. Maybe that's part of the illusion. I'm not saying it is part of the illusion and it never happened. I'm saying it might be like that and we don't know, we can't know. And to be open and to see that is the healthiest ground. And on top of that, where we say, I don't know, we say, I don't know, but I have to live life as if the past happened. Because we come across someone in the present moment, and then a thought arises, oh, that's Peter, who was my best friend in high school. And then we say, oh, hi, Peter, how are you going? It's been 25 years. And we have to live that way. We can't go around saying, oh, memories could be a complete illusion, so I'm not going to say hello to Peter because I never went to school with him, because the past doesn't exist. That would be swinging too much to the other side. And so in practical terms, we have to live as if the past existed. Where it's most important is if we are having thoughts about the past which are not allowing the past to be let go of. So we are having thoughts that say, I really didn't act like a good son to my mother or father while they were alive, let's say, and let's say they've died. And if that thought is continuously arising, we're told that the past didn't exist, or the past doesn't exist now. What exists is a thought of a dead past. Now the question is whether it's a dead past or a never existent past is sort of irrelevant. It's not that we're trying to find out the truth. Is it that the past never existed, or is it just that the past did exist but it doesn't exist now? The whole point of either of those pointings, which are different but in fact having the same effect, is it's trying to tell us continually worrying and holding on to the past does nothing but disturb the present moment. And so an appreciation of, yes, I may have, as a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning, functioned in a way that we could say is not optimal in terms of mother-son relationship. And yet we also have to say, well, how do I know what optimal is? Because that in itself may lead to something quite optimal, even just that, an appreciation that wasn't ideal may lead to a different way of relating to the people in the present moment. So there's all of these things that when they come together nicely, we see the purpose of these pointers, not for us to say the past didn't exist, but rather if we see thinking about a dead past happening, we can come back and say, actually what exists now, what's here right now is not the past, it's what's here now. And so bringing attention into what's here now has the capacity to cut off the regret, the blame, the shame that is existing and resting on a memory of the past. And so all the teachings are ever doing is trying to give us reason to come back now and be with what is, instead of maintaining a story of who we are that loves to remain in the past because it feels defined, by that. Whether it's good or bad, it gets a sense of existence out of the being defined as the one that lived the past. That's the conceptual sense of self, gets that sense of existence. If we can find in the present moment a self that exists in and of itself, then this obsession with the past and the future as a means of remaining in existence can fall away, because that's the psychological or conceptual self that wants to remain in existence. Should we touch on to this sense of existence that is prior to thinking, it's our own essence, then, coming back to the present is a coming home, is a knowing ourselves, and then this movement out of thinking, out of regret, becomes something that as soon as we think about it and remember, and see that we're lost in thought, it can automatically be, come back home, come back to the present, and it can become something quite natural. So all of these pointers, hopefully, they're there only to bring us back.
Yeah. I find that I'm continuously, more and more continuously coming into the present moment. If my mind wanders even for a minute about something, something's always pulling me back to just look, nothing else but look. If I do go to the past, I'm very aware that I'm selecting a certain perspective of it. It's all relative. I don't know. It's kind of fascinating now. Even just a moment ago, to me, is as much of a fiction as when I was my 5th birthday. That kind of a thing. So it's interesting to hear your take on it.
Yeah. The things you're saying are very indicative of this appreciation that what is more true is what's here now, free of the uncomfortable feeling. And so then, as you said, there's this automatic gravitation that is in a way effortless, because it happens simultaneously to a recognizing of the uncomfortable thinking, or the thinking mind. As soon as that is seen to be happening, we come back to presence very naturally and effortlessly, because we know we could say that's home, or more true, more real, more of what I am. It's very nice to hear.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Happy birthday.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for dropping in. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I think it's next Monday or Sunday for you guys in the US that the next intensive is happening. There's one each month. It's a 6-day intensive. As many of you know, I'm pretty impressed with the people, the participants signing up. There's good interest. So it's a 6-day online intensive, a 2-hour satsang on a particular topic. The next one is the end of shoulds and shouldn'ts, and that is very practical. And it's exploring how the belief in doership and attachment is heavily kept alive in the ideas of how our life needs to look, how we should and shouldn't act, which in a way is a very subtle, well, not so subtle, but maybe not so obvious way of saying my will, not God's will. When we deeply surrender into the fact that life is happening, we'd say, how do I know how I should act in this moment? And then there is a surrendering to let acting happen, let behavior happen, let decisions happen, and an allowing of that to happen in line with what feels more natural, feels more of one's preference, rather than being led and lived by a set of rules of how I should and shouldn't act, which really create a sense of doership and that psychological identity. And so a challenging of that in a slow way to start with, not necessarily jumping off the deep end, but letting go of small things can lead to a radical shift in how we end up living life, a shift that allows the understanding of non-doership to penetrate deep into our experience, because it explores how the belief of doership and attachment to outcome are kept alive in these deeply ingrained beliefs based on often what our parents or society tells us how we should live life. So anyone who feels inspired, welcome to sign up. The details are under the events tab on the webpage. For those who can't make it, there are recordings available of the intensives for a fee a bit less than the intensive, but not much. So it's, I think, worthwhile being there live if you can. If you can't make it to some of the days on the intensive, but you've paid for the intensive, then you will get the recordings of those days that you didn't attend. So if anyone feels like you want to go deeper into this topic of shoulds and shouldn'ts, feel free to join, and that's in about 8 or 9 days' time. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your day.